Hi there, I'm Logan Medish. Welcome to the High Caliber History Podcast. My guest today is Colby Lanham. He joined the Alamo in 2012 and is a history researcher with their Collections and Research Department. He is also a veteran of the United States Air Force and is a sixth-generation Texan. Colby, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. So let's start off with a little bit about you before we get into the Alamo itself. What exactly do you do there, and how did you get into this?
My job currently is to do historical research, and it can be as small as we have a new exhibit going up and we need help with the exhibit panels, or I need a quick synopsis of the battle and a write-up for a speech for someone within the organization, and then it can go as deep as like we need some deep dive research for an archaeological report, and so my job is to outline the history of the site or whatever it may be. A project could take a day, or it could be like one of the ones we have ongoing that I think you want to speak about. It's a year and a half in the works.
Yeah.
So it really just depends. So that's my job, the deep dive research. And the Alamo, when people think about it, it's like, well, that's a big museum, that's a big place, but we're actually very small. The Collections and Research Department has 7 people in it, including my boss, and I'm the only historical researcher. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
So it's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun and very rewarding.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think when people think of the Alamo, they don't, they picture the mission church there, but I don't think they understand the full scale of the Alamo in a historical context, right?
No, they don't. And it's through no fault of their own. The city has grown around and swallowed the Alamo up.
Right.
The outer walls are gone. And so a sense of arrival where you'd have it at like places like Gettysburg or, if you go to Shiloh or somewhere like that, then you get that sense of arrival. But here it's very difficult to find that. And so since you only have 2 of the original structures left of the Alamo compound, people can't make the decision or the distinction between, hey, this is the Alamo and this is not.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a little bit difficult.
Absolutely. You had mentioned briefly about, some of the work you do involves the archaeology on the site, and there's been quite a bit of that has gone on. What have you done with that you would say has really helped to move forward the interpretation of the site?
As far as archaeology is concerned, that's what my boss does. She is the head archaeologist. We just hired a second one. I have not had very much to do with the actual digging of the archaeology and stuff of that nature, but we did have to do a phase 1 report where we outline, what is the impact of this archaeology? What will it do to the site? And what's going to be impacted? What kind of history will we possibly find? So my job I was tasked with was look at the Alamo and the surrounding land, anywhere they're going to dig, and determine who owned it, which would be the Catholic Church, and then every hand it passed into from that point till now.
Okay.
And so, I had to go through county clerk records and find deeds and images and track down people from the past, 200 years, and decipher who owned it, how much they paid for it, when it moved to this hand. To that hand, and the history of San Antonio is so unique because the downtown area is transformed so many times.
Okay.
The famous Minger Hotel, which is right next door to us, one of the oldest in the country, or at least one of the most historically significant hotels west of the Mississippi. That hotel, before it was there were Turkish baths there.
Oh, wow.
There was a power and electric company there that actually brought electricity to San Antonio before New York City had it, which is something a lot of people don't think about.
No, not at all.
And so it's just the land has moved hand by hand to lots of different people. There's an undertaker right here on the property. There are carriage makers, and later on becomes the automobile industry that's taking over. So that was part of my job, outline the history and determine who had the land and when, how much they paid for it, and what we might find if we started to dig.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that having had so many different uses over the years, that really complicates the whole process, not just from a chain of custody process and figuring out who had what when, but also trying to interpret what you're going to find there. for so much of the city's history. You know, I'm sure you guys came up with horseshoes and horseshoe nails, you know, and then you've got to figure out, okay, well, what's the time period for that? Is this an early 1900s horseshoe, or is this more like a period of battle 1836 horseshoe?
Yeah.
And that's a lot to take into consideration there for you guys. It's not like, you know, for example, if you were on the Shiloh battlefield and you find a horseshoe or a mule shoe, you know, chances are it's probably from that battle.
That's right. That's right.
But you guys have a much bigger history that you have to deconstruct and work around. And I think, you know, I think people realize that the Alamo has kind of been swallowed up by the city, but they don't understand what exactly that means for the interpretation of the site.
Yeah, and you know, we have a 300-year story here. 300 years of that's just the Spanish portion. We have another 10,000 to 14,000 years of Neolithic history that also comes up. We found, we being archaeologists over the years, have found points. They have found ceramics and things of that nature. And then you've got just these layers of history, and so it's a very delicate process. Archaeological team does a very good job. They do archaeological spotlights. And so you can see those online. They're very good. And one of the things that they found that was so fascinating was a bronze, I believe it's bronze, either canister shot or grape shot inside the church.
Really?
Yeah, and it's smashed.
No kidding.
You know, that type of stuff for us to be able to see that and hold that, even for us who hold all these different artifacts, that is something that's so neat.
Right.
Because that likely is Battle of the Alamo period.
That's awesome. Yeah, you know, it's easy for those of us that work in museums to almost get a little jaded by the amount of amazing stuff that we get to see. But every now and then you have that one piece, and it doesn't have to be a big piece. You know, like you said, it could be a little bit of grape shot, but it has such a big impact, and it's so very cool to hold something so very little.
I agree.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's talk about the collections there at the museum. I mean, obviously, the whole point of what everyone understands about the Alamo is the battle. So there's obviously weaponry and small arms and cannons and things of that nature in your collection. And I want to talk about the cannon project that you guys have going on, because I think it's really fascinating. And the cannon project is actually how I found you. So little backstory for the listeners and the viewers. I was watching a video from a woodworker in Texas named Andy Rawls, and he was working on building a cannon model that he was working with Colby at the Alamo, because they're going to work on creating some replica cannons to help with the further broader interpretation of the site. And I just thought that was so very cool, and managed to track Colby down and get in touch with him. So Colby, tell us what is going on with the cannons at the site and the history of it and this project and the goals moving forward.
Yeah, so currently we're working on a very ambitious project to put some of the Alamo cannons back on the battlefield to help delineate the plaza and help visitors understand, where they're standing, the historical significance of that spot, but also tie in the artillery. The artillery is the reason, or at least one of the many reasons, that the Battle of the Alamo is even fought here. The Militia Reduction Act of 1835 means that all armaments need to be taken to a central location for use by the Mexican Army, and that's actually what kind of ignites the powder keg of the Texas Revolution. The small town of Gonzales doesn't want to give over a cannon that's on loan from the Mexican Army. The Mexican Army is tasked with going to retrieve that gun. The fight breaks out and the revolution's born, kind of the Lexington or Concord of the Texas Rev. Mm-hmm. And so, all these cannons end up here. Then after the battle's over with, the cannons are, they're still in their place. The Mexican Army, of course, loses about a month later, loses the final battle of the Texas Revolution a month later, and those cannons are then going to be knocked off of their carriages and buried. Then the 1850s are found again, and they're taken by the man who finds them, saying they're Maverick. Some of them are sold for intrinsic value, pay off debts. Some of them are melted down. One of them is melted down into a bell. It still hangs in the bell tower of, I believe it's St. Mark's Episcopal.
That's right, pretty cool.
Yeah, because they were part of that church and that congregation. They needed a bell, so he gave them one of the cannons. We believe it's a 6-pounder bronze gun. And so these cannons are going to be scattered to the wind. Well, over the years, the Alamos, you mentioned our collection, the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, who were direct descendants of men who fought in the Texas Revolution or lived during the Republic period here in Texas, they band together and started collecting from 1903 to 1905, and they formed one of the first museums the Alamo ever had, and they start saving these artifacts, and that's where our collection really comes from, but these cannons are part of that. And so we are very lucky to have 9 of the original 24 Alamo cannons within our collection.
That's awesome.
A couple of them are on loan, but they are here on our site. And so we were in a meeting, myself and a couple of colleagues, and Ernesto Rodriguez, who's the actual curator of the site and the site historian. Me and him are kind of chatting back and forth, and we were joking about, hey, you want to make a sense of arrival for people? Let's talk about, let's put cannons back on the battlefield. And it's kind of a joke, and someone overheard it and asked what we were talking about, and they liked the idea. And then, a couple of months later, we had money in our pocket, and we started buying cannons. So it's a very ambitious project. The hope is to get all of these cannons out of the elements and into a museum once that's built, and then have these replicas in their place so that people can understand not only where they're at in the battlefield, but can also understand the historical significance of these cannons and the role they played during the Texas Revolution and the Battle of the Alamo.
That's awesome. Now, you had mentioned that after the battle, the cannons got buried and then they were discovered again in the 1850s. Were they the individuals that found them, was it, hey, we know there are cannons here, let's go get them back? Or did someone kind of stumble upon them? They were digging for something else and, hey, look, there's cannons here.
Yeah, Samuel Maverick's wife, Mary Maverick, they lived on the what would be the northwest corner of the Alamo Fort. Samuel Maverick was actually one of the couriers who left the Alamo. He carries a deep regret for the rest of his life for not being able to be back with his comrades who died here. And so he builds a house on the northwest corner of the fort.
Okay.
He's building a fence for his wife, and he finds the cannons in his front yard. So that's how they come about. These cannons, are reburied. For a number of years, the Civil War breaks out, and the Confederate Army, I can't remember the exact person who was in charge of this department of Texas, but he's requesting cannons. We don't have any. Not only that, we don't have actual cannon foundry here in Texas that can produce it, not to my knowledge at least. There's one in Austin that tries, and the cannons they produce aren't very good. But they actually go to Sam Maverick and they dig them up. And they look them over and like, well, these are not in good enough shape to use. Something people don't realize, and a lot of Alamo historians didn't know for a long time, is that these cannons are extremely old when they're used at the Battle of the Alamo. The famous 18-pounder that the research we've done puts it about around 1670 is when it was cast.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's a very old cannon. So a lot of these cannons are ones that have been cast aside or removed from ships that are no longer in service, and they're brought into Texas and they're used. So that's how they're rediscovered. And then a number of them go, as I said, they're scattered to the wind. 2 of them go to a local park. Okay. And a citizen here in town loaded one of them up with gunpowder and fired it, and they exploded. Pieces went everywhere. It was a 6-pounder. Yikes. And then the famous 18-pounder disappears from that park. We don't know where it is, so it's lost to history.
Wow. Yeah, so no, I just learned something new. I did not realize that the cannons that they were using there were, 1670s, that they were essentially 150 years old already. Yes. I mean, a cannon's a cannon. It's not really going to break down if you take care of it. So I guess it would make sense that they could keep using them for so long. But I had no idea that they were fighting with century-and-a-half-year-old cannons. A
lot of people didn't know that. So when the project started out, you asked part of my job, I was tasked with taking each cannon we had in our collection and writing a historical, piece to attach that cannon. So if someone who came by and wanted to know about it, they could read about the cannon and we could have it on file. Mm-hmm. When we got to the 18-pounder, that's the most researched cannon there is regarding the Texas Revolution, besides maybe the Twin Sisters or the Gonzalez guns. And so when we got to it, I'm like, well, this is going to be super easy. This one will be simple. We can just blow right through it. And as we were looking at images, it said, the history and research behind it for the past 30 years has been, well, it's English. For sure, it's English. We already know that. And so when I'm looking for comparison guns that are not missing their trunnions, they're not missing their cascabel, or in some cases, their dolphins, I'm looking online at English cannons. It does not fit any of those. And even though the cannon's gone, we have 5 images of it, or roughly 5 or 6 images of this gun.
Right.
And I'm looking at it, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. It's not matching up. And this is during COVID, so we were working from home, and it's pretty late at night. And I was like, you know what? I'm Googling, and I said, I'm going to delete English. I'll just put 18-pounder. And I'm on page like 200 of Google Images looking at guns because this is a funky looking cannon.
Deep dive.
And, what was that?
Deep dive.
Yeah. And then I just stopped, and there was an exact copy of this gun. And I click on it, and it's in the National Ordnance Museum in Canada.
Really?
And I wrote them, and they wrote me back the next day, and like, yeah, this is a Swedish Finnbanker. And I just kind of sat there and thinking, like, no way there's a Swedish tie to the Texas Revolution, much less the Alamo. And so we got in touch with a woman named Ruth Brown, who is the senior ordnance person for, I can't remember her exact title, but for the entire United Kingdom. She was the head of the Royal Ordnance, the Royal Ordnance Society, and she worked on the Vasa project.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she knows her stuff, and I sent her some images, and she said, no doubt, that's a Swedish Finnbanker. And so that's what led us to how old is this gun? And we had another individual in South Africa who's been tracing these Dutch cannons and Swedish Dutch cannons. And he's like, yeah, it's about 1670, somewhere around there. And it just boggles the mind because the Alamo forever has been a story of adaptive reuse. The Alamo is whatever you need it to be, and it's always been flexible like that, and that's part of the reason it's still here. These cannons are the same way.
Right.
The 18-pounder was not an 18-pounder. It was a 9-pounder. They bored it out to an 18 to accommodate double the size of the round. So when they're firing that gun, I mean, that's some dangerous stuff. As you know, they stopped boring out guns by about 1865 because so many of those cannons were coming apart.
Yeah.
And it turns out a lot of the cannons of the Alamo were like that. They've been bored out and being reused. So
that's amazing. So now it starts to make a little more sense that the cannon blows up when it's in the park because it's it's been stressed enough having been rebored, and then if you get someone who doesn't know what they're doing, loading it up and letting it go. Oh man.
Yeah, that was a 6-pounder. I don't know if that one was rebored, but the 18-pounder, it meets it's pretty terrible fate. When it's dug up in the plaza, the locals tell these soldiers who dug it up, one of them later becomes a Confederate veteran, and he recounts a story in a newspaper article around 1919, I think, or 1917. I can't remember the exact date. And he says, yeah, when we dug it out, the locals told us there was treasure inside of it. And he said there were several spikes shoved down the muzzle. Okay. And so to get past the spikes, they took an acid-soaked rope and sawed on it for 2 days and then hit it with hammers and broke the muzzle off of it. And there was nothing inside. So they take this cannon that's now been broken, they put it on display on a plinth in San Pedro Springs Park, which is the second oldest park in the United States. And it's there for a long time, and then it just disappears one day. So that was even more difficult. We're missing 1.5 to 2 feet of the gun trying to determine its vintage. It was not easy.
Right. So how does, and obviously if it's still missing, you probably don't know the answer to this, but how does something like that just straight up disappear from a park? Like, how do you make off with that? I mean, it's not like a little, it's not like it's a rifle that you can just walk away with.
Yeah. Even with, 1.5 foot of the muzzle gun, it's still going to weigh, 1,500 pounds, somewhere around there, at least 1,000. There's a couple ideas. One, that it was scrapped during a World War I salvage drive for the war effort. We have not. That's been proposed, but we have not found any evidence to support that.
Okay.
The other idea is that when we were doing that deeper dive on the historical analysis of that gun, we found that the park was privately owned by a Mr. Mink. And Mr. Mink owned the park and everything inside of it.
Okay.
And then someone associated with either Ringling Brothers or Barnum and Bailey, their lead ringmaster goes and says, hey, the stuff you have in the park's pretty neat. They had all kinds of animals in it and they wanted to buy it. I found the original hand receipt or deed for that, and he lists out it says all animals, curios, and relics. So they may have bought that and carried it away. Or the last idea we had is that Mr. Mink actually brings his nephew over. and his nephew is a German blacksmith. And he's one of the last, he's listed in a couple of different articles as the last true blacksmith in San Antonio.
Okay.
And his house is across the street from the park. It's still there.
Oh,
and the
wow.
yard's just full of old rusty cast iron and stuff in the backyard. So it's very possible that gun could be in that yard, or that he repurposed that metal. We don't know. And so then there's a final theory that they shoved it in a nearby ditch, and it's been buried. And then it could still be there. We're not entirely sure.
That's wild.
Crazy.
That's just layer upon layer upon layer of history, which is the overall story of the Alamo, right? I mean, that's
everywhere you turn, if you think there's a simple answer about the Alamo, you're wrong. You just need to do some digging.
That's crazy. So with making the replicas, you've got Andy making the wooden replicas, but the final goal is not to have wooden guns, right?
Correct.
So what is it that you guys are doing with Andy's wooden cannons then?
So what we're doing is we're taking exact measurements. We had a company come out with LiDAR, and they scanned every gun on the property, and they come up with a 3D print, like a 3D image. That's sent over to Andy. He puts it in a program called SketchUp. He gets exact measurements, and then he prints out a wooden copy of that, a flat wooden copy out of plywood, and then he puts it on a lathe and he turns the exact copy. That pattern is being made in the same historical fashion as it would have been in the 1700s or 1600s. He's going to send that pattern. One of them's already been sent up to Ohio to a Bell foundry.
Okay.
And they're going to use that to make a hollow, empty cast, remove the wooden pattern he made, and then fill that empty void with bronze. And that's how the gun's going to come about. Every gun we're making is going to be fully functioning, or at least have the capability of being a fully functioning, fully firing cannon.
That's awesome.
So we're really excited. There's some talk about, maybe we should make some that are they're not functioning, or maybe we should make them out of this material. And the consensus is that, if you're going to make a gun, you make it firing, and you make it worthwhile. So that's what we've done.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what is the timeline for that? I know you guys have been working on this for a while already, but when do you expect completion?
I would expect completion of the project sometime in the next year and a half.
Okay.
We started off with 2 small 4-pounders that were, during the battle, we know they were unmounted, lying in the plaza. They did not have enough carriages for them. Mm-hmm. And so we started off with those 2 4-pounders. We drove from San Antonio to Idaho. We got them from a foundry there. Okay. A Texan who was excited about the Alamo battle came down here and measured that cannon. One of our exact cannons we have in our collection. It's on display. And he sent those up to this foundry, and the foundry replicated this Alamo gun for him. So those were easy to get. We drove up in a pickup and threw them in the bed of the pickup and drove them home. The 18-pounder has been fully recast. It's on it's a 2,000-pound gun barrel with a steel liner, a steel sleeve. That's fully functioning, sitting on a 1,000-pound white oak carriage, and it's in Alamo Plaza, back where it would have been on the battlefield. We have 3 of the 12 guns we're going to make in total already on the battlefield. And we're working on a bronze 4-pounder and a swivel gun right now.
Wow. So that 18-pounder, that is a 1-ton gun with a half-ton carriage.
That's right. It is an absolute monster.
Oh my God.
Humongous. The gun barrel, if I remember correctly, is nearly 8 feet long.
Wow.
Back in the day with the powder they were using, the round would have been obviously 18 pounds, about 5.5 to 5.25 inches across, and that would have used about 6.5 to 9 pounds of powder, depending on the powder quality. So talking about a massive monster of a gun, and we actually replicated the southwest corner of the Alamo. We rebuilt that portion of the fort to give people an idea of where you're at, of course, but also you stand up there on that platform, you're about the same height as Travis and Bowie would have been, and you're standing there for the first time in 185 years at that same level, getting the same view they would have got, and the 18-pounders behind you, which is, it's just cool to see that stuff
amazing. Yeah, that's awesome, because it's one thing to go and stand on a field of battle anywhere, but to have, gun emplacements and cannons, to have there be objects from the battle, whether they are replicas or otherwise, to help give you that sense of space and that sense of scale to be able to replicate that. There's nothing else like it. I mean, you don't get that any other way. So that is amazing that you guys have put that back together like that after 185 years.
I think you hit the nail on the head. You can talk about it all day long, but until you stand there, that's what puts it into perspective for people. And it's a good mindset to always have that as someone working in this field. But to be able to realize those ideas we're very lucky to work where we work with the people that are backing us the way they are. And so that's another side of it, having the management and the people who love you at the state level and at the Alamo level that will push your ideas and make them a realization. So we're very lucky in that regard too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and talking about people that love the Alamo, I mean, there's a lot of people that love the Alamo, and it's one of those interesting things about the Alamo and about Texas as a whole. It's not just Texans that are in love with Texas and in love with the Alamo. I mean, it reaches all over. It's, even though it's Texas Revolution, but that's American history, and everyone feels kind of like they're a part of the Alamo, and it's not just a national thing, it's an international thing. Yeah. And so one of the things I want to talk about is a collection that you guys have come into fairly recently from an unlikely source, or at least unlikely that most people would think. And that is the Phil Collins collection. Yes, that Phil Collins, the one you're thinking of, not just some guy named Phil Collins, but the musician Phil Collins is an Alamo collector. So let's talk about him and his collection and what that means for you guys in future displays.
Yeah, we're really lucky. We're lucky to have the following that we do at the Alamo. And like you said, it's not just Texans. This is a very international story. You have people from all over the world fighting at the battle. You've got people from all over the world coming to Texas after the fact. And even today, Texas is very culturally diverse. And Houston just surpassed New York as the most culturally diverse city in the United States.
Oh, wow.
Which is mind-boggling, Yeah. And so Texas has always, kind of been this melting pot for people coming who want a new adventure or a new start on life. And that story goes way past the battle. And then it's realized, in this case, in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Hollywood starts making these films, Fess Parker playing David Crockett and John Wayne, the Alamo film. And it created this entire following, an entire generation who fell in love with the Alamo story. And one of those people is Phil Collins. Phil Collins began his collecting journey with his first wife, who actually bought him a hand receipt from one of the men who was fought in the Texas Revolution. It's a handbill for a saddle and a horse.
Oh, wow.
And he did not, the story I've heard is that he did not fully realize that these artifacts are still out there. And so when his first wife bought that for him, he was kind of taken back. He said, well, this is something I could do. He had the star power, he had the money. And he actually told us one time the first song he ever sang in public was David Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier.
No kidding.
Yeah, at a talent show. So so his collecting journey and his love for the Alamo started very, very young. Yeah. And of course, there is an English tie to the Alamo. You have a number of Alamo defenders who are English. And so he grew up watching these shows and he fell in love with the site and the story. And we're very lucky to have his collection as part of ours currently. Is a number of artifacts from the Texas Rev. A couple of them are tied directly to Alamo defenders in a number of ways, and then a lot of really neat documents that he had collected over the years, which those are so precious because of those things don't usually last. And they're just they're tossed or they burn, or Galveston flood that took place. It swallowed up a lot of really, really interesting documents and books. And so he had the largest collection of Alamo-related artifacts in the entire world outside the United States.
Wow.
And outside of our collection. So we're very lucky that he came and he donated it to us.
That's huge.
And if you talk to Ernesto Rodriguez, our curator, he's been here 22 years, and he was the one that brought in the Collins collection. And he told me one time that Phil said, you only play with a toy so many times before you need to share it with others, right?
Okay.
So that's what he's doing. And we just put some of it on display. We did a whole deal on the Mexican Army. So we put some of those artifacts out. Now we're dealing with the Texan side of it.
Okay.
Currently, we have an arrest warrant for William Barrett Travis for insurrection and inciting revolution.
Okay.
Exactly what he did.
Right.
We have a private letter from David Crockett to a good friend of his talking about his disdain for Andrew Jackson. It just goes on and on. These artifacts, the original muster roll from the garrison, written by Colonel James Neal.
That's cool.
Is here, and it's on display. And you look at those artifacts, and it's a direct tie.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's amazing. So you guys have done a couple small feature exhibits for the collection. What is your long-term plan for his collection and exhibits in general in the future? Because I know space is obviously a premium where you guys are at. So
yeah. Currently, our museum space is very small. We're trying to tell a 300-year story in a very tight area, and our vault is also very small. And so we just broke ground on a new collections building last week, and so they're going to build a collection, a vault and collection hall and an exhibit. And so they're building on the backside of the property. They're removing some of the older buildings that are from the 1980s, nothing of historical significance or cultural significance. Those buildings will be removed, and then they're going to put this in its place, and that will be the temporary spot for the Phil Collins exhibit, and also some of the other artifacts from our collection that have not been on display very much or at all. And then we're across from the Alamo. We are working with the city of San Antonio and the state to build a very large museum, and that will be the permanent home for the Collins collection and a number of other artifacts. So hopefully we can get all that on display so that Texans, but also everyone visiting our site, can come and enjoy those artifacts and get a better understanding of what happened here.
That's so cool. That you guys are on the cusp of so many amazing things right now. I mean, between the Cannon project and Phil's collection and breaking ground and building. I mean, there's a lot going on for you guys right now. And you said you're a staff of just 7 in your department?
Yeah, we have assistant curator, 2 archaeologists, a registrar, and myself. So it's not very many people, but we do have a very large visitor services staff. We have a living history department, and so the museum staff's mostly dealt with our department, and all the research comes out of our department. But very much a team atmosphere. You have to be when you have that small of a staff, and so I think we do a pretty good job of interpretation and our forward-facing history with the public. So
that's great.
It's one of those things that, as a small museum with small staff, you learn to adapt, and I think we will grow over the next couple of years. But for the time being, we are still very small.
Sure. So before we do our wrap up here, I have one question remaining for you that I ask everyone who comes on the show. If you could meet one firearms inventor or creator or whatever from history, living or dead, who would it be and why?
Oh man, a firearms guy. I thought you were going to say historic person. I already had that one. Firearms. Oh, geez. I'd like to meet Samuel Colt. I know that's probably a cliche answer that everyone always says, but his tie is specific to Texas and the Revolution and after, and the Texas Rangers. And, my ancestor that was here, you mentioned 6th generation Texan. My ancestor fought at San Jacinto.
Okay.
And he was a Texas Ranger afterwards. I'd like to meet Samuel Colt. I'd like to meet the man, and so that's who I would like to meet. I think it'd be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be really cool. And especially to talk with him about the involvement with the stuff in the Rangers. And of course, we get the Colt Walker, because of Captain Walker and working with him. And there's such an interesting story surrounding that gun. That's not cliche at all. I mean, Colt is a very fascinating guy. And so I think we'd all like to pick his brain for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So for folks that want to learn more about all the projects that you guys have going on, obviously they can come visit you in person in San Antonio, but it's not always the most feasible thing. So where can folks find out more information about you guys and learn about your projects and support you guys?
Yeah, a good way to do it is just to go to thealamo.org. We update our website a lot. You can also sign up for a newsletter where we send out new stuff that's happening, whether it's archaeological stuff or research, things of that nature. So you can go to thealamo.org. Also, our social media is updated daily, sometimes multiple times, and they will release really neat information and historical facts. So those are two good places you can go to learn about the Alamo if you're not actually coming to the site.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us on the show. Colby Lanham from the Alamo, I appreciate you coming on and telling us about all the amazing projects. Looking forward to seeing what you guys have going on in the future. So again, Colby, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.